You were told the child was yours, not because it was true, but because she needed you to believe it. And you did. Of course you did, because everything in your nature, your upbringing, your instincts told you to. The culture praised it. The poets glorified it. The family photographs told the story before it ever unfolded. The man, the woman, the child, the future. But what you didn't see, what you were never meant to see, was that this story was never written for you. It was written through you. Because you, like every man before you, were simply the instrument, not of her, of nature. There is no cruelty more silent than that which comes wrapped in necessity. She did not lie, not in the way liars do. She believed what she needed to believe until she didn't. Until the child was born. Until your role had been fulfilled, until the invisible hunger that had driven her toward you had vanished, and in its place something cold, something blank, something distant appeared. And you felt it. That subtle shift, that strange absence. The look in her eyes that once begged for your essence now looked past you, through you, as if your presence were an echo from a task already completed. You asked yourself what changed. The answer was nothing. She had simply finished using you, not with malice, not even with awareness, but with the certainty of biology. What the poets call love, Schopenhauer calls the will to live. A blind, relentless force that uses individuals for one goal only, the continuation of the species. The child was not born for you. The child was born through you, and when your usefulness expired, so did the illusion. But you were not told this. No one tells the man that love is bait and fatherhood is function. They tell him it's his legacy, his meaning, his place in the world. And so he sacrifices, he works, he bleeds. He bends his back to carry a lineage that is not his but belongs to a force that neither knows nor cares that he exists. Have you ever looked at the child and felt a quiet doubt you were ashamed to voice? Have you ever wondered why her gaze toward you grew colder even as the child grew stronger? This is not a flaw in her. This is her design. The will needed you to believe, to protect, to provide, and once the infant emerged, the will withdrew its illusion from her and left you holding a role no longer needed. That pain you feel, it's not madness, it's clarity, it's the dissolving of the lie. And most men cannot bear it, so they double down. They cling harder, they tell themselves stories. She's tired. She still loves me. It's just a phase. But inside they know. They know they have been used, not by her heart, but by something far deeper, by the machinery of life itself. And so now you stand there, not as father, not as lover, but as relic. A man with a title that no longer entitles him to anything. And what can you do with that? You can begin by understanding. This was not your failure. This was the structure. This was the system that all men walk into, blind, hopeful, doomed. Comment, she needed me to believe, and I did. Not because you were stupid, but because you were human, and now at last you begin to see. You thought it was love. And perhaps in some fleeting moments it even felt like love. But what you called love was never for you. It was never about your soul, your poetry, your kindness. It was your genetics, your posture, your resources, your presence. What she responded to, what she was drawn to, was not the person but the pattern, the configuration of traits that her body, far beneath her mind, calculated would serve the will's blind agenda. You believed you were chosen. You were not. You were selected. Schopenhauer said, "Love is but the consciousness of the species in the individual." That what we call romantic passion is the species itself whispering through the blood, tricking the individual into sacrifice for a goal it cannot see. You thought she loved you, but she loved what could pass through you. Your lineage, your sperm, your labor. You were the bridge, not the destination. And once that crossing was complete, what need was there for the bridge to remain admired? This is the deepest betrayal. Not of morals, not of loyalty, but of metaphysics. It was never about happiness. It was about utility. The species used your illusion to secure its survival, and once its grip on the future was assured, the illusion evaporated. Her affection turned cold, her body turned away. Her eyes began to regard you with the subtle disdain of someone who has already moved on. Not to another man necessarily, but to another phase. A phase in which you no longer held the center. You were baited by closeness and captured by instinct. She didn't lie. Not in the conscious sense. She believed at the time in what she said. That you were her only one. That she couldn't live without you, that she wanted your children. But these words were not promises. They were compulsions. Echoes of something deeper moving through her. Something older than language, older than morality. Something the will installed. This is why so many men feel hollow after the child is born. Not because the child is a burden, but because the woman who once clung to him as if he were heir, now regards him as unnecessary. His usefulness has expired, and her body knows it. The child is now the vessel for her instinct, the center of her attention, the reason she was ever drawn to you at all. This is not hatred, this is biology. And the man, still thinking in the language of love, legacy, and romance, feels crushed. He does not understand. He looks for reasons. I've done everything right, he says. Why has she changed? But the answer is devastatingly simple. She hasn't. She has completed the purpose. And you were never meant to survive it intact. You ask yourself if the love was ever real. It was. But it was real only in the way a flame is real to the match that strikes it. Temporary, instrumental, necessary for ignition, not meant to burn forever. If this feels familiar, if the warmth turned to distance, the intimacy to function, then you are not crazy. You are not broken. You have simply seen through the veil. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Comment, I wasn't chosen. I was selected. And that difference, once seen, changes everything. You believed you were essential. You believed that your strength, your loyalty, your labor would secure your place. But the truth is far colder. You were never necessary. You were useful. And there is a vast difference between necessity and utility. The male in the metaphysical architecture of life is disposable, not by mistake, by design. Look to nature, not the sentimental stories told by culture, but the raw, indifferent mechanics of biology. In the animal kingdom, males fight, fertilize, and fall. Some are devoured after mating. Others are exiled the moment their purpose ends. The female continues with the child. The male is left behind. This is not a glitch in evolution. This is its signature. Schopenhauer saw it clearly. The will to live is not concerned with individual happiness. It does not care for the dreams of men, nor the suffering they endure when discarded. It moves with only one aim, to persist through reproduction. And for this, the male is needed only briefly. In humanity, the process is concealed beneath layers of emotion and ritual. But the structure remains. The mother is certain. The father is told. And in that gap between blood and belief resides the most enduring lie of civilization. That a man's bond to the child is sacred, protected, honored. But this bond exists only so long as it serves function. Once it does not, the man becomes negotiable. Ask yourself, how many fathers have been erased with the stroke of a court pen? How many men have been stripped of access to their own children, deemed unworthy not by violence or neglect, but by the shifting tides of a woman's preference? And more deeply, how many of those men were never fathers to begin with, not in biology, but in belief? Paternity is a structure of faith, but faith is fragile. And when that faith collapses, when the man realizes he was the host, not the heir, something breaks that no apology, no compensation, no new relationship can repair. It is the collapse of meaning, and it is devastating. You thought you were irreplaceable, that your child would carry your name, your mannerisms, your memory, but now you see. None of that was guaranteed. Your presence was conditional. Your authority, illusory. You were a function dressed in sentiment, and the moment your function ended, so did the affection. You may think this is cruelty, but it is not personal. It is structural. You were never the center. You were never the end. You were the passage. And this is why so many men, after losing the illusion of fatherhood, feel not only pain but shame. because they believed, they gave everything, and they were left with nothing. Not because they failed, but because they were never meant to keep what they helped create. You were never hers. The child was never yours. You all belong to the will. Comment. I was the passage, not the point. And now you know, not as bitterness, but as the only kind of truth that sets you free. You want to believe that your sacrifice meant something, that the pain you endured, the work you did, the soul you poured into your role as partner, provider, and parent was seen, was valued, was remembered. But the truth is this: the will doesn't care. It never did. It never saw you as a person. It saw you as a path, a means, a vehicle through which it could pass. Schopenhauer understood this long before the modern man suspected it. He wrote that the individual is nothing. The species is everything. Your thoughts, your desires, your heartbreaks are irrelevant to the will. All that matters is that the cycle continues, that the next body is born, that life feeds on life once more. And for this, the will recruits you with promises it never intends to keep. It doesn't ask for your consent. It doesn't explain itself. It floods your blood with longing, lust, obsession. It drives you to fall in love, to protect, to provide, to stay. And once it has what it needs, it recedes, leaving you hollow, confused, and abandoned. Not by her, not by the child, but by the force that made you believe they were yours in the first place. This is the mechanism. The child is born and the illusion dissolves. She no longer looks at you with hunger. She no longer touches you with reverence. Her gaze is elsewhere now, fixed on the new center of her being. And you, once the hero, now feel like a shadow in your own home. You think, what did I do wrong? But you did nothing wrong. You fulfilled your purpose. And now, the will has no further use for you. Do not expect gratitude from it. Do not look for justice. The will is blind. It is a hunger without eyes, a compulsion without conscience. It created the stars, the oceans, the beasts, and it uses men the same way it uses soil, wind, and fire, until depletion, until ruin. That's why she changed. Not because she stopped loving you, but because the will withdrew its projection. The spell broke. The need shifted. Her biology completed its task, and the part of her that once reached for you now turns toward the offspring. This is not betrayal. This is programming. And here is the hardest truth. You were never loved by the will. You were only borrowed. This is why the man who seeks meaning in romance, in reproduction, in being needed, always ends in despair. Because all those meanings are planted by the will and uprooted the moment they are no longer necessary. The only escape is to see this clearly and stop expecting the eternal from what was only ever designed to be temporary. You were not broken, you were used. And now that you've been discarded, the real question becomes, what will you do with the clarity? Comment, I was borrowed, not loved. Because until you admit this, you will continue to search for affection in places designed only for extraction. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. The change is subtle, almost imperceptible. One day she looks at you a little less. Her body no longer moves toward yours with that instinctive longing. The warmth fades from her voice. The touches become routine, or disappear altogether. You tell yourself she's tired, that it's just a phase, that once the chaos settles, things will return to how they were. But you already know. Somewhere inside, even before your mind admits it, your body understands you are no longer needed. The child has arrived. The will has completed its task, and the woman who once seemed to orbit around you now orbits around something else entirely. Not out of cruelty, not out of conscious betrayal, but because the will has shifted her axis. You were the means. Now the product is here, and your relevance fades like the echo of a storm that's already passed. This is the most brutal realization a man can face. Not just that he has lost her, but that he was never meant to keep her. You were the bridge across which the will carried its purpose. And once crossed, the bridge is no longer admired, it is ignored. She does not even understand it herself. She will say she still cares. She may believe she still loves you, but her instincts have moved on. Her mind is confused by her body's retreat. And you stand there, bewildered, asking questions that will never be answered honestly, because she no longer has access to the part of her that once needed you so desperately. Schopenhauer would not call this deception. He would call it function. You fulfilled your biological role. And now, like all things in nature, once they've served their purpose, you are put aside, not punished, not hated, just irrelevant. But because we are men, raised on stories of eternal love, loyalty, and legacy, we do not accept irrelevance easily. We fight against it, we beg, we perform, we sacrifice more. And the more we do, the more we reveal our helplessness. And that helplessness in the eyes of the will is the final disqualification. For the will does not respect the man who clings. It respects only the one who serves, then disappears. You must understand, the moment she no longer needed you was not the moment she changed. It was the moment the illusion ended. What you called love was the magnetism of necessity. And necessity is not permanent. It dies the moment its task is done. You feel the chill, the emptiness, the loss. And rightly so, because you are grieving something that was real, but only real for a time, not eternal, not transcendent, just briefly necessary. And that necessity is over now, so you have two choices. Continue pleading for scraps from a role that has already been retired, or step away and begin the long, cold walk toward truth. Comment: she didn't betray me, she completed the cycle. Because once you see this, you stop asking her to return, and start asking yourself who you were before the will borrowed you. They told you to build, to pass on your name, to create something that would outlast you. They told you that your children would carry your memory, that your bloodline would ensure your permanence. And so, you did what they said. You worked, you sacrificed, you endured indignities and pain with the quiet hope that it would all mean something one day, that when your time was over, your name would remain. But now you see, your name was never the point. Schopenhauer wrote that the individual is nothing but a fleeting appearance, a mask worn once by the will. What we call legacy is not personal, it is biological. The will does not care for you, only for its own continuation. You, with all your dreams, your values, your discipline and suffering, are swept aside the moment your usefulness ends. The child may carry your features, but it does not carry your soul. The world forgets you faster than you imagined possible. And what of the child? If you are lucky, they will think of you with warmth. If not, they will think of you not at all. But in either case, your identity dissolves into the fog of time. Your name is not a monument. It is a temporary label, carried briefly, then discarded. The idea that you will live on through your children is the sweetest lie the will ever told the man it used. You gave everything in the hope that it would echo. But echoes fade, and so you stand now in the ruins of the myth. You realize that the house you built was for a future that has no memory. The child was not your legacy. It was the will's replication. The family was not your temple, it was your assignment. The love was not your bond, it was your leash. And yet this realization is not despair, it is release. Because now, finally, you understand that you do not need to be remembered. You do not need to be honored. You do not need to be enshrined in the stories of others. All of that was illusion, chains tied to a dream of permanence. And now that those chains are broken, you can walk without dragging the weight of a name that was never meant to last. This is not the end of meaning. It is the end of false meaning. And in its place arises a terrible and beautiful clarity. Nothing you built was ever truly yours. And therefore, nothing you lost can destroy you. Comment: my name was a mask. The will wore it once. When you no longer live for legacy, you begin to live for truth. And that, finally, is your own. You were not the first to believe the lie. You will not be the last. In fact, it is this very lie of love, of legacy, of fatherhood as sacred that holds all of civilization together. It is the dream upon which men are harnessed, upon which duty is yoked, upon which kingdoms are built and sustained by those who will never sit on their thrones. and it is a lie that must remain invisible for the machinery to continue working. Society cannot afford for men to see what they truly are: instruments, tools of reproduction, engines of labor, sentinels of safety, givers, providers, protectors. But never the point, only the passage. If men understood this from the beginning, they would never fight the wars, build the towers, or bind themselves to women who regard them as seasonal functions. They would withhold their effort, withdraw their devotion, disappear from the stage the will forces them onto, and that's why this lie is protected at all costs. The myth of paternal significance, the fairy tale of eternal love, the sacralization of the nuclear family. These are not expressions of truth. They are necessary illusions cultivated and maintained not to enlighten the man but to employ him, to keep him moving, to keep him sacrificing, to keep him believing that what he gives is part of something noble. But nobility is merely the fragrance poured over necessity. She needed you to believe, the state needed you to commit, the church needed you to stay, the system needed you to work, to obey, to fight, and to do all of it willingly. Not as a slave, but as a father, not as a tool, but as a man. And so they gave you symbols, ceremonies, songs. They gave you the illusion of being central. You never were. The child was for the will, the love was for its purpose, and everything else was just theater, rituals to keep you from waking up before your usefulness expired. This is why, when the illusion breaks, the man collapses. Not because he lost the woman, not because he lost the child, but because he lost the story, and with it, his reason to endure. Schopenhauer wrote that the average man does not want truth. He wants certainty. He wants comfort. And society provides this by feeding him sweet lies from the moment he is old enough to dream. But when the man awakens, when he sees the machine for what it is, he is cast out. Not because he is wrong, but because his vision threatens the entire structure. You are not alone in this exile. Every man who saw clearly, every philosopher, every skeptic, every discarded father has walked this same path. To awaken is to be cut off. But that severing is not punishment. It is the beginning of something higher. You have exited the dream. Now you must learn to live in the raw, unsoftened light of what is. Comment: I walked out of the myth, and I won't return. Because once you've seen how the lie works, you no longer resent it. You simply stop living inside it. When the illusion breaks, when the spell is gone, the first instinct is rage, to strike back, to make her see, to make them pay. The man who has given his soul and been discarded feels an ancient fire rising, one not of hatred but of betrayal. And he believes that justice demands noise, that vindication will come through retaliation. But Schopenhauer would say this: do not waste your strength chasing those who were never yours to begin with. What you want is not revenge. What you want is recognition. But the tragedy is this: those who used you are not capable of recognizing what they did. Not because they are evil, but because they were never acting with awareness. She did not calculate the harm. She followed her nature. She acted as the will dictated. The machine does not apologize to the part it wears down. To seek revenge is to still believe you were owed something, and to believe you were owed is to still be caught in the illusion. The truth is colder. You were not wronged. You were used, and use is not a moral crime. It is the logic of nature. The lion does not hate the gazelle. The mother does not hate the father she no longer touches. The will moves forward, and it does not look back. So let others rage. Let the disillusioned write their stories of betrayal in courtrooms and broken promises. Let them shout into the void. You, if you have truly seen, must walk a different path. Not because you are weak, but because you are finished. Distance is not retreat. It is the mark of a man who no longer offers himself to systems that feed and forget. Distance is the shield of clarity, the quiet space in which truth is preserved from noise. You do not scream to be heard. You withdraw to remain unbroken. Let her speak as if she never knew what she was doing. Let others call it sadness or confusion or time. You will not argue, because there is nothing left to defend. What happened was not a mistake. It was a function. And now that you know this, you no longer demand repair. You do not chase. You do not explain. You do not ask the world to understand. You simply leave. And not in bitterness, not in performance, but in stillness, in knowing. Comment. I don't need revenge. I needed to see clearly. Because once you have seen the machinery behind the illusion, you do not waste your life cursing the gears. You simply stop putting your hand inside them. Yes, you were used. Not by a woman, not by a court, not even by society. You were used by nature itself, by the will that drives all living things forward without aim, without mercy, without meaning. You were consumed in the service of a force that neither knows you nor cares for you, because it is blind, utterly blind to everything but continuation. This is not a comforting truth, but it is the only truth worth hearing. The will does not love you, it does not see you. It does not reward virtue nor punish betrayal. It simply moves, it hungers, and to that hunger you were once essential. Now you are spent, and the ache in your soul is not proof of failure. It is proof that you have stopped pretending. Most men never get this far. Most men stay in the dream. They remarry, recommit, reinvent their delusion and walk back into the mouth of the same machine, praying for different results. But you, somehow, have seen too much. You can no longer be lulled by lullabies of legacy and love. And now you stand at the edge, alone, wounded, awake. And it is here, finally, that clarity begins. You see that there was no meaning but the one you were told to believe. You see that your suffering was not proof of personal failure, but structural design. You see that all you gave, your energy, your youth, your hope, was extracted not to honor you, but to perpetuate life. And when that life arrived, you were folded away like yesterday's blueprint. But now you know. Now you understand what you are and what the world is. You are not a soul chasing fulfillment. You are not a man destined for legacy. You are a flicker in a vast blind storm called existence. And yet, within that flicker, you have achieved something rare, awareness. Schopenhauer wrote that the highest consciousness is not that which finds happiness in the world, but that which sees through the world, that which stops being deceived, that which ceases to chase, to crave, to bow to the will that enslaves all things. This is where your suffering becomes sacred, because it has burned the lies away, because it has left you raw enough to perceive the real. You will never again walk blindly into illusions. You will never again think love is unconditional. You will never again confuse biology for belonging. And in that renunciation, in that detachment, there is a kind of dignity no fantasy can offer. You were a tool, yes, but now you are something else. You are a witness, a man who has been to the bottom and returned without demands. That is power. Comment. I was used by nature, but now I see. Because once you see clearly, no one can ever use you in the same way again. Not because they won't try, but because you at last no longer need to be used. If this spoke to what you've lived, if it put words to the silence you've carried, leave your mark below. Share your truth. And if you're ready to keep walking further into clarity, you know where to find me. Subscribe for more, not to be comforted, but to be woken up again.